I won't let you drink that, madam. It's dangerous, Genda! Don't just stand there!
A small brown hand shot across the armrest and slapped a crystal glass clean out of an elderly woman's grip. Water exploded across first class, drenching cream-colored leather seats that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Ice cubes scattered across the carpet like diamonds. The flight attendant's mouth fell open in absolute horror. Other passengers jerked their heads around, some already reaching for their phones to capture what looked like complete chaos unfolding at 30,000 feet. The elderly woman in seat 2A, dressed in what was clearly a designer suit, sat frozen with her hands still suspended in midair where the glass had been just seconds before. Her pearl necklace caught the overhead light as her chest rose and fell in shock. Standing in the aisle was a 9-year-old black girl in a worn purple jacket, her small frame trembling but her jaw set with determination. Behind her, a woman who had to be her mother stood completely paralyzed, one hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that only a parent knows when their child has just done something catastrophically embarrassing in public. The flight attendant found her voice first, and it came out sharp and accusing. This child just assaulted a passenger. But what happened in those few seconds wasn't an assault. It was something else entirely. Something that would change multiple lives forever and expose a dangerous secret that could have ended in tragedy. To understand what really happened up there in first class, we need to go back. Back to where this all started, 30 minutes earlier, in the cramped waiting area of Gate 47 at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Tracy Washington didn't look like someone who was about to become a hero. She looked like what she was, a small 9-year-old girl with her natural hair pulled into 2 neat puffs, sitting cross-legged in an uncomfortable airport chair, completely absorbed in a book that seemed way too advanced for someone her age. The book's title read Fundamentals of Chemical Reactions, and she wasn't just flipping through it. Her finger traced each line carefully, her lips moving slightly as she absorbed information about molecular compounds and chemical safety protocols. Her purple jacket had seen better days. The cuffs were frayed, and there was a patch on the left elbow that her mother had sewn on carefully to extend its life through another season. But it was clean, pressed even, because Denise Washington believed that dignity wasn't about what you could afford. It was about how you carried yourself through this world. Denise sat beside her daughter, her own eyes red-rimmed from crying she tried to hide in the airport bathroom 20 minutes earlier. At 38, she looked older. 2 jobs will do that to you. Every day she worked from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon as a medical transcriptionist, typing up doctor's notes and patient files until her fingers cramped. Then she'd go home, sleep for 3 hours, and head out again at 8 p.m. to clean office buildings until 4 in the morning. She'd been running on this schedule for 3 years, ever since her husband died, leaving behind medical bills that still haunted her mailbox like ghosts that refused to be buried. Now they were flying to Seattle because Denise's sister, her only sibling, had passed away suddenly from a heart attack at 41. The funeral was tomorrow. Denise had been saving $8 here, $12 there, skipping lunches and walking to work instead of taking the bus, all to afford these 2 economy tickets. 8 months of sacrifice sat in those boarding passes. Tracy turned a page in her chemistry book, and something caught her attention across the terminal. An elderly man, probably in his 80s, stood near the departures board with his boarding pass clutched and shaking hands, his eyes scanning back and forth across the screen with growing confusion and panic. Without a word, Tracy closed her book, slipped her father's old science journal under her arm, she took it everywhere, the leather cover worn soft from 3 years of constant handling, and walked over to the man. "Excuse me, sir," her voice was soft but clear, the kind of careful pronunciation that came from a child who'd been raised to speak with respect. "Do you need help finding your gate?" The man looked down at her, relief flooding his weathered face. "I'm supposed to be at gate 52, but I can't seem to figure out which direction that is, and my daughter is already on the plane and..." Tracy gently took his boarding pass, examined it, then pointed down the concourse. "Gate 52 is in Concourse D. You're in Concourse C right now. See that sign up there? Follow the blue line on the floor. It'll take you to the train. Take the train 1 stop to Concourse D, then turn right. Gate 52 will be the 4th gate on your left. Your flight doesn't board for another 30 minutes, so you have plenty of time." The man's eyes actually teared up. "Bless you, child. Bless you." As Tracy walked back to her mother, an announcement crackled over the PA system. Their flight to Seattle was now boarding. Denise stood, gathering their small carry-on bags, and Tracy noticed something her mother tried to hide. The way she winced slightly when she bent down. The way her hand went to her lower back. The exhaustion that had settled into her bones like sediment. "Mom, I can carry both bags," Tracy offered. "Baby, I've got it. Denise said, but her voice was tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. It was the tiredness of a woman who'd been strong for too long with no break in sight. They joined the boarding line, Tracy clutching her father's journal against her chest. Inside that journal were his notes from when he'd worked as a lab technician before he got sick. Before the illness that the doctors said was treatable, if only they'd had better insurance. If only they'd caught it earlier. If only, if only, if only. Those two words had haunted their family for 3 years. Her father had taught Tracy to notice things. To read labels. To ask questions. To never assume that just because something looked safe, it was safe. The devil is in the details, he used to say, tapping the side of his head. Most people don't look close enough. But you, Tracy girl, you've got the eyes for it. You see what others miss. She missed him so much it felt like a physical ache in her chest. The line moved forward, and soon they were scanning their boarding passes and walking down the jet bridge. Tracy's heart beat a little faster with nervous excitement. She'd only flown once before, when she was 6, and she barely remembered it. As they stepped onto the plane, Tracy's eyes widened. They had to walk through first class to get to their economy seats, and it was like stepping into a different world. Wide leather seats that looked more like recliners. Real glasses, not plastic cups. Cloth napkins. Actual legroom. In seat 2A sat an elderly white woman with silver hair pulled into an elegant bun, wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Denise made in 2 months. She was reading the Wall Street Journal, a pen in her hand as she made notes in the margins. For just a moment, the woman looked up from her paper, and her eyes met Tracy's. There was no judgment there, no dismissal. Just a slight, warm smile. The kind of smile that said, "I see you." Then she returned to her reading, and Tracy and her mother continued down the narrow aisle toward the back of the plane. Their seats were 32B and 32C, squeezed in the middle section with barely enough room to breathe. Denise helped Tracy into the window seat, then settled herself in the middle, their small bags tucked under the seats in front of them. Tracy pressed her face to the window, watching the ground crew load luggage below. She opened her father's journal, running her fingers over his handwriting. On the first page, he'd written, "For Tracy. Never stop asking why. Never stop looking closer. The world needs people who pay attention." She didn't know it yet, but in just a few minutes, those words would be put to the ultimate test. And what she would see, what she would notice when everyone else was looking away, would set off a chain of events that seemed impossible for a 9-year-old girl from a struggling family. Before we continue with what happens next, if you're invested in Tracy's story, hit that subscribe button. Because what unfolds on this flight is going to shock you, and you won't want to miss how this ends. Now, here's my question for you. Have you ever noticed something dangerous that everyone else missed? Something small that could have turned into something serious? Drop your story in the comments below, because after you hear what Tracy sees, you'll understand why paying attention to details can literally save lives. The contrast hit Tracy the moment they stepped from the jet bridge onto the aircraft. It was like crossing an invisible border between two completely different countries. First class wasn't just nicer seats. It was a different universe entirely. The carpet under her feet was plush, a deep navy blue that her worn sneakers sank into slightly with each step. The seats were massive, covered in butter-soft leather the color of rich caramel. Each one had enough space that you could practically do cartwheels in them. Real wooden armrests. Actual pillows that looked like they belonged in a fancy hotel, not the flat, plastic-wrapped excuse for comfort you'd find in economy. And the overhead bins were already open, with flight attendants carefully arranging passengers' designer luggage like they were handling museum artifacts. Tracy's eyes tracked across the details her father had trained her to notice. Crystal glasses already positioned on fold-down tray tables. Cloth napkins, the kind that required ironing, folded into perfect triangles. Small bottles of champagne chilling in ice buckets. Fresh flowers in miniature vases attached to the bulkhead wall. The air even smelled different up here, like expensive perfume and leather, instead of the recycled air and stale pretzels that would dominate the back of the plane. And there, in seat 2A, sat a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a portrait in a museum. Constance Pemberton, though Tracy didn't know her name yet, radiated the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself. Her silver hair was pulled back into a bun so precise it could have been engineered with mathematical instruments. Not a single strand out of place. Her cream-colored suit was clearly expensive, the kind of fabric that Tracy's mother would have recognized as Chanel from her years of watching rich people come through the medical office where she transcribed notes. A 3-strand pearl necklace sat against her collarbones, each pearl probably worth more than Denise's monthly rent. But it was her hands that Tracy noticed most. They were elegant, yes, with perfectly manicured nails painted a subtle shade of pearl that matched her necklace. But they were also the hands of someone who worked. Not physically, perhaps, but there was a pen moving across the margins of the Wall Street Journal she held, notes being made in sharp, decisive handwriting. This was a woman who was still building something, still creating, still engaged with the world despite her age. As Tracy walked past, slowing down slightly because the aisle was narrow and a businessman was struggling to shove his briefcase into an overhead bin, Constance glanced up from her newspaper. Their eyes met for just a second. Maybe two. Tracy expected what she usually got from wealthy white people, the kind of look that slid right over her like she was invisible, or worse, the kind that tightened around the edges with suspicion or discomfort. But Constance's expression held neither of those things. Her blue eyes, sharp and intelligent behind subtle reading glasses, softened at the corners. A slight smile touched her lips, genuine and warm, the kind of smile that said she actually saw Tracy as a person, not as a category or a statistic or a child to be dismissed. Then she returned to her newspaper, and the moment passed. Denise's hand rested gently on Tracy's shoulder, guiding her forward. They continued down the aisle, and the transformation was stark. The carpet became thinner. The seats became narrower, wrapped in dark blue fabric that had seen thousands of passengers. The armrests were plastic. The overhead bins were stuffed chaotically with bags and coats and duty-free shopping. The air got warmer, more confined. Row 32 was near the back, just 3 rows from the lavatories. Tracy climbed over her mother to reach the window seat, 32B, while Denise settled into 32C. Their knees immediately pressed against the seats in front of them. When Tracy tried to open her father's journal, she had to angle it awkwardly because there wasn't enough space to hold it straight. Around them, economy class filled with the soundtrack of budget travel. Crying babies. Someone's phone blaring a video at full volume. A man arguing with his wife about whether they should have paid for early boarding. A teenager's headphones leaking music so loud it was practically a public performance. The overhead bins slamming shut with heavy thuds. Denise reached up to adjust the air vent, and Tracy saw her wince again, that flash of pain across her mother's face that she tried so hard to hide. 3 hours of sleep between 2 jobs, and now flying across the country to bury her sister. Tracy wanted to say something comforting, but the words felt too small for the weight of everything her mother carried. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their departure time and the flight duration. 3 hours and 42 minutes to Seattle. Tracy settled in, opening her father's journal to a page where he'd drawn detailed diagrams of laboratory safety equipment. Eyewash stations. Emergency shut-off valves. Chemical storage protocols. Always know where the safety equipment is, he'd written in the margin. Always read the labels. Always ask questions. That's when Tracy first noticed the flight attendants beginning their pre-flight routine. There were 2 working their section of the plane. The first was a woman who looked like she'd stepped off the cover of a magazine. Brittany Sheffield, according to her name tag, had blonde hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail without a single flyaway. Her makeup was flawless, probably took her 4 to 5 minutes to apply. Her uniform was pressed so sharply you could probably cut paper on the creases. She moved through first class like she was performing ballet, all graceful gestures and practiced smiles. But Tracy noticed something about those smiles. They never quite reached her eyes. When Brittany leaned down to ask the businessman in 3C if he wanted champagne or orange juice, her voice dripped with honeysweet attentiveness. When she offered Constance Pemberton a choice of newspapers, she practically bowed. But when she passed through economy, her face transformed into something else. Not quite rude, but close. Dismissive. Like she was tolerating an inconvenience. The second flight attendant was completely different. Jerome Palmer was a black man in his mid-30s with kind eyes and a genuine smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. He didn't move with Brittany's rehearsed grace, but there was something authentic about him that Tracy immediately trusted. When he welcomed passengers aboard, he actually looked at them, made eye contact, acknowledged them as human beings. As the plane filled up, Denise raised her hand slightly, trying to catch Brittany's attention as she swept past their row for the 3rd time. "Excuse me, miss? Would it be possible to get a blanket? My daughter gets cold easily, and..." Brittany barely slowed down. "We'll be doing a service cart after takeoff. You can request one then." Her tone wasn't overtly rude, but it carried the clear message that Denise's request was an imposition. Then she was gone, headed back toward first class where her real priorities waited. Tracy watched her mother's shoulders sag slightly, that small deflation that came from being made to feel like you were asking for too much when you were asking for so little. But less than 3 minutes later, Jerome appeared at their row, 2 blankets folded neatly over his arm and 2 bottles of water balanced in his other hand. "I noticed you might want these," he said to Denise, his voice warm and conspiratorial, like they were sharing a secret. "It does get chilly once we reach altitude. And the water's on the house." "Well, it's all on the house technically, but you know what I mean." Denise's face transformed with gratitude. "Thank you so much. You didn't have to." "My pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure." Jerome handed Tracy her blanket and water directly, treating her with the same respect he'd shown her mother. "You doing okay there? Got enough room?" Tracy nodded, suddenly shy in the face of such straightforward kindness. As Jerome moved on to help other passengers, Tracy wrapped herself in the thin airline blanket. It wasn't much, but it was something. And it was given freely, without judgment, without that underlying message that they should be grateful for crumbs. The plane pushed back from the gate. The safety demonstration began, flight attendants going through the motions of oxygen masks and flotation devices that most passengers ignored. Tracy watched carefully anyway, noting the emergency exits, counting the rows between them and the nearest one. 5 rows forward, 7 rows back. Her father would have approved. Takeoff was smooth. The plane tilted back, and Tracy watched Atlanta shrink below them, the buildings and highways becoming miniature, then toy-like, then invisible beneath clouds. Her stomach did that weird floating thing it always did when they climbed, and she gripped her father's journal a little tighter. Once they reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and the cabin settled into the routine of flight. People pulled out laptops and books and tablets. Some closed their eyes for naps. Others queued up movies on the seatback screens. And Brittany Sheffield began her drink service in first class. Tracy wasn't trying to spy. She was just looking up from her father's journal, stretching her neck after reading for too long, when she happened to glance forward. The economy section sat higher than first class, so even from row 32, if you looked at just the right angle between the seats, you could see glimpses of what was happening up front. Brittany had rolled out a cart that looked like it belonged in a 5-star hotel. Crystal glasses caught the cabin light. Ice buckets gleamed. She moved from seat to seat with elaborate care, pouring drinks like each one was a performance art piece. Tracy watched as Brittany reached Constance Pemberton in 2A. Even from 30 rows back, Tracy could read the interaction. Constance set down her Wall Street journal and said something. Brittany nodded, smiled that practiced smile, and responded. Constance said something else, and this time Brittany's smile tightened slightly. She shook her head, said something that looked apologetic, and gestured toward the cart. Constance hesitated. Tracy could see it in the way the older woman's hand paused before nodding acceptance. Whatever she'd asked for, she wasn't getting. Whatever Brittany was offering instead was clearly second choice. Brittany turned toward the galley, and that's when Tracy's entire world tilted. The galley was partially visible from where Tracy sat, just a sliver of space between seats and around the curve of the cabin wall. Brittany stepped into that space, her back to the passengers, and Tracy watched her reach for something. At first, Tracy's brain tried to make sense of what she was seeing in a normal way. Brittany was getting water. That's what flight attendants did. They got drinks. Nothing unusual about that. But then Tracy's eyes, trained by her father to read labels, to notice details, to never assume, focused on the bottle in Brittany's hand. It wasn't a normal water bottle. The label was bright yellow and red. Warning colors. The kind of colors that screamed danger in any language. And even from this distance, even with her 9-year-old eyes, Tracy could read enough of the text to know exactly what she was looking at. Do not consume, cleaning supply. The words might as well have been written in fire. Tracy's stomach dropped so fast she thought she might throw up. Her hands went cold. Her father's journal slipped slightly in her grip. She watched, frozen in horror, as Brittany deliberately tilted that bottle and poured clear liquid from it into a crystal glass. Not a splash. Not an accident. A full, intentional pour, filling the glass about 3/4 full. Then Brittany opened the ice bin, used tongs to add 3 perfect ice cubes. Then she pulled a lemon from a small container, cut a fresh wedge with practiced efficiency, and placed it on the rim of the glass. It looked exactly like what it was supposed to be. Pure, innocent, filtered water. But Tracy had seen the truth. That water came from a bottle labeled for cleaning supplies. Industrial chemicals. The kind of stuff her father had written about in his journal, the kind of chemicals that could burn your throat, destroy your stomach lining, cause organ failure. And Brittany was about to serve it to the elderly woman in seat 2A. Tracy's hand shot out and grabbed her mother's arm so hard that Denise gasped. "Mom, Trace's voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. "Mom, that water." Denise turned to her daughter, and what she saw on Trace's face made her own expression shift to concern. "Baby, what's wrong? Are you feeling sick? Do you need that water?" Tracy pointed forward, her hand shaking. "The flight attendant, she poured it from the wrong bottle. It's not drinking water. It's cleaning chemicals. She's going to give it to that lady, and if she drinks it..." "Honey," Denise's voice was gentle but firm, the tone she used when Tracy was letting her imagination run wild. "You must have seen something wrong. I'm sure the flight attendant knows what she's doing. They're trained for this. You probably just saw the angle weird, or..." "Mom, I can read the label from here. It says do not consume. It says cleaning supply. I saw her pour it. I watched her do it. It wasn't an accident." The plane hit a small patch of turbulence, and the seatbelt sign dinged on with a soft chime. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, asking flight attendants to take their seats. But Brittany wasn't taking her seat. She was walking out of the galley, that crystal glass of poisoned water balanced perfectly on a small tray, heading directly toward Constance Pemberton. "Honey, we need to stay in our seats during service," Denise said, her hand on Trace's shoulder, holding her daughter in place. "The seatbelt sign is on. You can't just run up there. And besides, you're probably mistaken. These things are more complicated than they look, Anne." Tracy watched Brittany reach seat 2A. Watched her place the tray down on Constance's fold-out table with a flourish. Watched Constance look up from her newspaper and smile gratefully. Watched Brittany say something that made Constance nod. And then Tracy watched Constance Pemberton reach for that glass. Every molecule in Trace's body was screaming at her to do something. Her father's voice echoed in her head, "If you see danger, you speak up. You don't wait. You don't second-guess yourself. You act." But she was 9 years old. Trapped in a middle seat in row 32. The seatbelt sign was on. Her mother was telling her to stay put. And what if she was wrong? What if she ran up there and made a scene and humiliated her mother and herself, and it turned out to be nothing? What if the label she read was for something else? What if Brittany knew something Tracy didn't? The fear of embarrassment wrestled with the fear of catastrophe in Trace's chest, and for 3 eternal seconds, embarrassment was winning. Then Constance lifted the glass toward her lips. And Tracy knew, with the absolute certainty that sometimes comes to children before adults lose the ability to trust their instincts, that if she didn't act right now, in this exact moment, that woman was going to die. Before you find out what Tracy does next, I need you to hit that subscribe button, because what happens in the next 60 seconds is going to leave you absolutely speechless. This 9-year-old girl is about to make a choice that will change everything. Here's my question for you. If you were Tracy, what would you do? Would you trust what you saw and risk public humiliation, or would you stay quiet and hope you were wrong? Let me know in the comments, because the decision she makes in the next moment is going to test every ounce of courage she has. Trace's hands moved to her seatbelt buckle before her brain had even finished making the decision. The click of it releasing sounded impossibly loud in her ears, like a gunshot in the confined space of the cabin. "Tracy, no." Denise's whisper was urgent, her hand reaching out to grab her daughter's arm. "Sit down. Right now. The seatbelt sign is on, and you cannot just..." But Tracy was already standing, her legs shaking so hard she wasn't sure they'd hold her weight. She pushed past her mother, squeezing into the aisle. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to sit back down, to be quiet, to be good, to not make a scene. 9 years of being taught to be polite, to not bother people, to stay in her lane, all of it was crushing down on her shoulders like a physical weight. But she could still see Constance Pemberton's hand on that glass. Still see the crystal rim moving toward those elderly lips. Tracy started walking forward. The economy section seemed to stretch out impossibly long, like one of those nightmares where you're running but never getting anywhere. Heads turned as she passed. A businessman in 28D looked up from his laptop with annoyed confusion. A mother in 25B pulled her toddler closer, like Tracy might be dangerous. A teenage boy in 23A smirked and nudged his friend, both of them watching this little black girl in her worn purple jacket walking toward first class like she was the entertainment. "Where's that kid going?" someone muttered. "Probably trying to sneak into first class," another voice answered with a laugh. Tracy's face burned with shame, but she kept walking. Her father's journal was still clutched in her left hand, and she held it against her chest like a shield. Each step felt like she was walking through water, everything moving too slow and too fast at the same time. She reached the invisible border between economy and first class, that place where the carpet got thicker and the seats got wider, and suddenly Brittany Sheffield was there, materializing in the aisle like a perfectly groomed guard dog. Little girl, Brittany's voice was sweet as poison, that fake kindness that adults use when they're really telling you to go away. You need to return to your seat. The seatbelt sign is on, and passengers aren't allowed to. That woman can't drink that water. Trace's voice came out smaller than she wanted, but it came out. That was something. Brittany's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. She crouched down to Trace's eye level, the way adults do when they want to seem approachable but are really just patronizing you. Sweetie, this is first-class service. Everything is perfectly fine. I'm a trained professional, and I can assure you that our water meets all safety standards. Now, why don't you head back to your seat before we have to involve the captain? Behind Brittany, Tracy could see Constance Pemberton. The older woman had picked up the glass. Her fingers wrapped around the crystal. She was bringing it toward her mouth. Tracy tried to push past Brittany, but the flight attendant's hand shot out, gripping Tracy's shoulder. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop her. Firm enough to make it clear that Tracy wasn't going anywhere. Please, Tracy's voice rose, loud enough now that passengers in first class started turning around. Please, don't drink it. Constance paused, the glass just inches from her lips. Her sharp blue eyes focused on Tracy over the rim of the crystal. And in that moment, Tracy made a choice that would haunt her nightmares and define her courage for the rest of her life. She wrenched herself free from Brittany's grip, her purple jacket sleeve sliding through the flight attendant's fingers. She lunged forward, stumbling over someone's expensive leather carry-on bag that was sticking out into the aisle. Her small body crashed into the armrest of seat 2A, and her hand shot up in a desperate arc. Her palm connected with the bottom of the crystal glass just as Constance was tilting it back to drink. The glass flew from Constance's hand like it had been launched from a catapult. Time seemed to slow down in that horrible way it does during car accidents and falls, where your brain processes every microsecond in excruciating detail. The water arced through the air, catching the cabin light, droplets scattering like diamonds. The lemon wedge tumbled separately, spinning end over end. The ice cubes followed their own trajectories, bouncing off the leather headrest. The crystal glass hit the armrest of seat 2B with a sound like a small explosion. It shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces that scattered across the cream-colored leather seats, across the plush carpet, across Constance Pemberton's expensive Chanel suit. Water soaked into the leather, darkening it immediately. It splashed across the Wall Street Journal, the ink bleeding and running. It drenched the cloth napkin on Constance's tray table. Drops hit the window and ran down like rain. For one eternal second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The entire first-class cabin was frozen in shock. Then chaos erupted. Oh my God! A woman in 3A shrieked, jumping up from her seat. What the hell? The businessman in 2C was on his feet, his own drink sloshing as he backed away. Phones came out instantly. At least 5 passengers started recording, their screens glowing as they captured every moment. This was going viral before it even ended. Tracy could already imagine the headlines, the comments, the judgment. Brittany's face went from pale to bright red in about 2 seconds flat. Her perfectly applied makeup seemed to crack around her eyes as they widened in fury. I'm calling the captain. Her voice came out shrill, all pretense of professionalism evaporating. This is unacceptable. This child just assaulted a passenger. This is... child. Constance Pemberton's voice cut through the chaos like a knife through butter. It wasn't loud, but it carried authority that made everyone, including Brittany, immediately shut up and pay attention. What did you see? She wasn't angry. She wasn't screaming. She was sitting there, soaking wet, covered in ice water and broken glass, and her voice was completely calm. Her sharp blue eyes were locked onto Trace's face with laser focus, and there was something in them that wasn't accusation. It was curiosity. Maybe even concern. Tracy was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Her teeth were chattering despite the warm cabin air. Tears were streaming down her face, and she couldn't tell if they were from fear or relief or shame or all three at once. The water, Trace's voice came out in gasps between sobs. It came from the wrong bottle. I saw her pour it. I saw the label. It said cleaning supply. It said do not consume. She poured it from that bottle, and then she added ice and lemon to make it look normal, but it wasn't water. It was chemicals. It was poison. Brittany's red face somehow went even redder. That's absolutely ridiculous. She whirled on Constance, her hands raised in a gesture of innocent disbelief. You're going to believe a child making up stories? She's clearly disturbed, probably seeking attention, and I can assure you that every beverage served on this aircraft meets strict safety. Wait. Constance raised one hand, and again, everyone fell silent. She was still looking at Tracy, and her expression had shifted into something unreadable. Let her speak. But before Tracy could say anything else, Denise came rushing up the aisle, her face a mask of mortification and horror. Her hands were shaking as she reached for her daughter. Tracy, what have you done? She turned to Constance, and the apology that came out of her mouth was weighted with years of having to apologize for existing in spaces where she wasn't wealthy enough to belong. I'm so sorry. I don't know what got into her. She's usually such a good girl, she would never, we'll pay for any damages, I said wait. Constance's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath it now. The kind of steel that came from decades of being in charge, of making decisions that affected thousands of people, of knowing when something important was happening. She looked at Brittany, and her gaze could have frozen fire. This child is terrified. She's shaking. She just risked public humiliation and potential legal consequences to knock a glass out of my hand. Why would she do that unless she genuinely believed I was in danger? The cockpit door opened with a pressurized hiss, and a man in a captain's uniform emerged. Captain Devon Richards was in his 50s, with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone with military training. His face was set in professional concern as he took in the scene. Broken glass everywhere, water soaking the seats, a crying child, and an elderly woman calmly sitting in the middle of it all. What's going on back here? His voice had that particular quality of command that probably worked great in emergencies. I heard shouting. Constance turned to face him, and when she spoke, her tone wasn't requesting. It was directing. Captain, I'd like the galley inspected. Now. Captain Richards blinked. I'm not sure what. This child believes she saw the flight attendant pour my beverage from a bottle of cleaning chemicals. I'd like you to check the galley immediately to verify or disprove this claim. I'd like it done now, before anyone has a chance to dispose of evidence. The word evidence hung in the air like smoke. Several passengers gasped. The phone's recording suddenly had even more interesting content to capture. Brittany's laugh came out strangled, too high-pitched. This is absurd. We're going to delay the flight, upset all these passengers, cause a massive scene because of a child's imagination? Captain, I've been flying for 6 years, and I would never. I'll check. Jerome Palmer stepped forward from where he'd been standing near the rear galley, watching the whole thing unfold. His face was serious in a way Tracy hadn't seen before, all traces of his earlier kindness replaced by professional concern. Captain, I'll check the forward galley right now. Jerome, you don't have to, Brittany started, but Jerome was already moving past her. The next 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. The entire first-class cabin was silent except for the ambient noise of the engines and air circulation. Even the passengers who'd been complaining about the delay had shut up, too invested in the drama unfolding to care about their schedules anymore. Tracy stood there, still crying, her mother's arm around her shoulders. Denise was whispering apologies and prayers under her breath in equal measure, and Tracy could feel her mother's body shaking too. They were going to be in so much trouble. They were going to get kicked off the plane. They might even get arrested. And all because Tracy had seen something that maybe, possibly, she'd misinterpreted. What if the bottle said something else and she'd just read it wrong? What if? Jerome emerged from the galley. His face had gone from brown to almost gray. In his hand, he held a plastic bottle, and even from where Tracy stood, she could see the bright yellow and red warning label. Captain. Jerome's voice was tight. This bottle of industrial descaling solution was open. And there's residue in the sink where first-class drinks were prepared. The bottle is half empty. It should have been stored in the locked maintenance cabinet, but it was out on the counter, uncapped, right next to the filtered water dispenser. The collective gasp from the passengers was audible even over the engine noise. Captain Richards took the bottle from Jerome, his face hardening as he read the label. This is phosphoric acid-based industrial descaler. It's used for cleaning the coffee maker and water systems. He looked at Brittany, and his expression was no longer professional concern. It was cold fury. Why was this out and open during beverage service? Brittany's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Her perfectly made-up face had gone from red to white, her eyes darting between the captain, the bottle, Constance, and the cameras still recording everything. That must have been, someone else must have. Her voice trailed off as she realized that there was no good answer. No explanation that would make this okay. Someone else? Captain Richards's voice could have cut steel. You're the lead flight attendant. You're responsible for this galley. And according to this child, you were seen pouring from this bottle into a passenger's drink. That's not. I didn't. She's lying. Brittany's composure completely shattered. She's a child. Children lie. They make things up for attention. You're going to take the word of some. She stopped herself, but the unspoken word hung in the air anyway. Everyone knew what she'd almost said. Constance Pemberton stood up. Water dripped from her suit, and pieces of glass tinkled to the floor. But she rose with such dignity that it commanded every eye in first class. She looked at Brittany, and her voice when she spoke was quiet, but it carried to every corner of that cabin. That child just saved my life. If I had consumed phosphoric acid at my age, with my medical history, I would very likely have died before we reached Seattle. My esophagus would have been burned. My stomach lining destroyed. I would have gone into shock, and emergency medical care at altitude is extremely limited. She turned to Tracy, and her eyes were shining with something that might have been tears. What's your name, dear? Tracy, the word came out as barely a whisper. Tracy Washington. Tracy Washington, Constance repeated, like she was memorizing it. You are the bravest person on this aircraft. And I owe you my life. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, you need to hit that button right now, because this story is about to take a turn that nobody saw coming. What happens next is going to restore your faith in humanity. Let me ask you this, have you ever stood up for someone when it would have been easier to stay silent? When every part of you was scared but you did it anyway? Drop your story in the comments, because Tracy just showed us what real courage looks like, and I want to hear about the moments when you found that courage too. Captain Richards didn't hesitate. He pulled out his radio and spoke into it with the clipped precision of someone who'd been trained to handle emergencies. Ground control, this is Flight 447. We have a code yellow situation. I need airport security to gate 47 immediately. We are not departing until this is resolved. Repeat, we are grounded until further notice. The passengers erupted in a mixture of reactions. Some groaned about the delay. Others were still filming, their phones held up like digital torches. A few were already typing furiously, probably posting to social media about the insane drama unfolding at 35,000 feet. Except they weren't at 35,000 feet yet. They were still on the ground, and now they were going to stay there for a while. Brittany Sheffield was falling apart in real time. Her perfectly constructed facade, all that practiced professionalism and glossy presentation, was crumbling like a sandcastle in a tsunami. Tears streaked down her face, taking her mascara with them in dark rivulets. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to grip the seat backs to stay upright. It was an accident. The words burst out of her in a sob. I was distracted. I didn't mean to use the wrong bottle. It was sitting right there, and I wasn't paying attention, Anne. Captain Richards held up the bottle of descaling solution, his face a mask of controlled anger. Miss Sheffield, 30 seconds ago you said this child was lying and that you never touched this bottle. Now you're saying it was an accident. Which is it? Brittany's mouth opened and closed. Her eyes darted around like a trapped animal looking for an escape route that didn't exist. I was confused. It all happened so fast. I meant that I didn't mean to use that bottle. I grabbed it by mistake. The lighting in the galley is terrible, and we were rushed, Anne. We departed on schedule, Jerome interjected quietly, his arms crossed. There was no rush. And the descaling solution bottle looks nothing like a water bottle. Different size, different shape, bright warning labels. You'd have to be completely negligent to confuse them. Negligent? Brittany's voice went shrill. I've been working double shifts all week. I'm exhausted. The airline keeps cutting staff, and we're expected to do the work of 3 people. Yes, I was on my phone in the galley for 2 minutes checking on my sick mother, and maybe I got distracted, but that doesn't make me. Wait, you were on your phone? A passenger in 4C, a middle-aged woman with highlighted hair, stood up. I asked you for help with my bag 20 minutes ago, and you told me you were too busy with pre-flight duties. But you were actually just on your phone? Another passenger, this one a businessman in 5A, chimed in. She was incredibly rude to me when I asked about meal options. Told me I should have checked the website before booking if I had dietary restrictions. A younger woman in 3D added, I saw her in the galley earlier, definitely on her phone, and she seemed annoyed when Jerome asked her a question about the beverage cart. It was like opening floodgates. Suddenly passengers were coming forward with complaints, small grievances that individually might have seemed petty but together painted a picture of someone who'd been checked out, careless, more focused on her phone and her convenience than on the safety of the people she was supposed to serve. Constance Pemberton sat back down in her wet seat, seemingly unbothered by the water still soaking into her expensive suit. She watched Brittany's breakdown with an expression that Tracy couldn't quite read. Not satisfaction, exactly. More like sad resignation, the look of someone who'd seen this pattern play out too many times before. The cockpit door opened again, and 2 airport security officers boarded the plane. They wore dark uniforms and had radios crackling with static at their shoulders. Behind them came someone who looked like a supervisor, a woman in a different uniform with more insignia. Captain Richards briefed them quickly, showing them the bottle, explaining what had happened. The officers listened with increasingly serious expressions, occasionally glancing at Brittany, who was now openly crying, her perfectly straight blonde ponytail coming loose as she shook her head. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she kept saying between sobs. "I would never intentionally poison someone. It was a mistake. Just a terrible mistake. I'm so sorry. Please, I can't lose my job. I have student loans. I have rent. I can't." "You're going to need to come with us." The lead security officer's voice was firm but not unkind. "We need to take a full statement, and the airline will be conducting their own investigation. You're not under arrest at this time, but this is a serious safety violation." Brittany looked around desperately, like someone might step in and save her. But Jerome's face was closed off, disappointed more than angry. The passengers were either hostile or indifferent. Captain Richards was already on his phone, probably calling the airline's emergency line. Nobody was coming to her rescue. She grabbed her purse from the crew storage area, and the security officers flanked her as they escorted her down the aisle. Every passenger watched her go. Some were still recording. Tracy heard the click and whir of phone cameras capturing every second of Brittany's walk of shame. As she passed Tracy and Denise, Brittany's red, swollen eyes locked onto Tracy's face for just a moment. There was something complicated in that look. Blame, maybe. Or shame. Or just the desperate confusion of someone whose life was imploding and who was looking for anyone else to hold responsible. Then she was gone, disappeared into the jet bridge, and the cabin erupted in chatter. Captain Richards addressed the passengers over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for this delay. Due to a safety incident, we've had to remove a crew member from the flight. We will be departing as soon as we complete our safety checks and file the required reports. We appreciate your patience. Jerome Palmer will be taking over as lead flight attendant, and will be doing everything possible to make the remainder of your flight comfortable." The cabin slowly settled back into an uneasy normalcy. Passengers returned to their seats, though the energy was completely different now. Everyone was buzzing with adrenaline and gossip. This would be the story they told at dinner parties for years. "Remember that time someone almost got poisoned on our flight?" Jerome made an announcement, his voice warm and steady despite everything that had just happened. "Folks, I want to assure you that we take your safety incredibly seriously. We'll be conducting a full inspection of all galley equipment and supplies before departure. In the meantime, we're offering complimentary beverages and snacks to everyone. Thank you for your understanding." Then he walked over to where Tracy and Denise still stood in the aisle, both of them looking shell-shocked. Constance Pemberton was watching them with an expression that had softened considerably from the sharp authority she'd wielded during the confrontation. Constance addressed Denise directly, her voice losing its commanding edge and taking on something more personal. "Might I have a word with you and your daughter? In private?" Denise looked like she wanted to refuse, to grab Tracy and retreat to their economy seats and pretend this whole nightmare hadn't happened. But when a billionaire asks you for a word, you don't exactly say no. "Of course," Denise managed. Constance stood and gestured to the seats around her. The businessman who'd been in 2C had already moved, happy to take a seat further back if it meant avoiding the continued drama. The empty seats left a little bubble of privacy in the middle of first class. "Please, sit." Constance indicated the seats beside her, and after a moment's hesitation, Denise and Tracy sat down in the leather chairs that cost more than their monthly rent. Tracy sank into the seat and immediately understood why people paid thousands of dollars extra for this. It was like sitting on a cloud. The leather was soft and perfectly supportive. There was enough legroom that she could actually stretch her legs out. A small pillow and blanket were already positioned on the seat. It felt obscene and wonderful at the same time. Constance settled back into her own damp seat, apparently unbothered by the wet fabric. She turned her full attention to Tracy, and being the focus of those sharp blue eyes felt like standing under a spotlight. "Tracy, do you understand what that bottle contained?" Tracy nodded, her voice small. "Phosphoric acid. It's used in industrial descaling. It dissolves mineral deposits in pipes and machinery. My dad's journal has a whole section on acids and their properties." Constance's eyebrows rose. "Your father's journal?" Tracy held up the worn leather book she'd been clutching this entire time. "He was a lab technician. He kept notes on everything. Chemical safety, laboratory procedures, proper handling protocols. He wanted me to understand how things worked. Why safety matters. May I?" Constance extended her hand, and after a glance at her mother, Tracy handed over the journal. Constance opened it carefully, treating the worn pages with reverence. Her eyes scanned the neat handwriting, the detailed diagrams, the careful annotations. She was quiet for a long moment, just reading, and Tracy watched a series of emotions cross that elegant face. Respect. Sadness. Something that might have been recognition. "Your father was a very intelligent man," Constance said finally, handing the journal back. "And clearly a very good teacher." "He died 3 years ago," Tracy said, and saying it out loud still hurt like a fresh wound. "He got sick, and we couldn't afford the right treatment because our insurance wouldn't cover it. The doctor said if he'd gotten care earlier, if we'd had better insurance, he probably would have survived." Denise's hand found Tracy's, squeezing tight. Her mother's eyes were wet, and Tracy could feel her trying not to cry. Constance was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. "That descaling solution contains concentrated phosphoric acid. If I had consumed even a small amount, at my age, with my medical history, I have a heart condition, you see, and my esophagus has been weakened by years of acid reflux, the damage would have been catastrophic. The acid would have burned my throat and esophagus. It would have caused severe damage to my stomach lining. At altitude, with limited medical equipment, I would have gone into shock. Even if we'd made an emergency landing, the damage might have been irreversible." She leaned forward, her hands folded in her lap, and looked Tracy directly in the eyes. "You saved my life, young lady. And you did it despite being terrified. Despite knowing you might be wrong. Despite the social cost of making a scene. That's not just intelligence. That's courage of the highest order." Tracy felt tears welling up again, but these were different from the scared tears before. These were relief and validation and the overwhelming emotion of being truly seen by someone who mattered. "I just saw the label," Tracy whispered. "My dad always said to read labels. To pay attention. To speak up when something's wrong, even when it's scary." "He taught you well," Constance said. "Tell me more about him." And Tracy did. She told this elegant stranger about her father's love of science, about the experiments they'd do together at the kitchen table with baking soda and vinegar and food coloring. About how he'd take her to the library every Saturday and let her check out as many books as she could carry. About how he'd explain the periodic table while they washed dishes, turning every mundane task into a teaching moment. She told Constance about the day he got sick, how it started as just a cough that wouldn't go away. How it got worse and worse, but they kept putting off the doctor because they couldn't afford the copay. How by the time they finally went, it was pneumonia that had spread to sepsis. How they'd sat in the hospital while doctors said things like, "If only we'd caught it earlier," and "the prognosis isn't good." She told her about the medical bills that came afterward, numbers so big they didn't even seem real. About her mother working one job, then two, then taking on extra hours at both just to keep the debt collectors from calling. Denise sat quietly through all of this, and Tracy knew her mother was reliving every painful moment. But she didn't stop Tracy from talking. Maybe because Constance was actually listening, really listening, in a way that most people didn't when a 9-year-old spoke about complicated things. Captain Richards came back through the cabin, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Pemberton, we've completed our safety inspection. All galley equipment has been thoroughly checked. We're cleared for departure." Constance nodded. "Thank you, Captain. Before we take off, I'd like to make a request. These 2 passengers will be remaining in first class with me for the duration of the flight. Please have their belongings brought forward from their original seats." The captain looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, I'll have Jerome take care of that right away." Denise tried to protest. "Oh no, that's not necessary. We're fine in economy. We don't need any special." "I insist." Constance's tone made it clear this wasn't up for debate. "After what your daughter just did, it's the absolute least I can offer." Jerome appeared with their small carry-on bags, having already retrieved them from row 32. He set them carefully in the overhead bin above their new first-class seats, and his smile when he looked at Tracy was genuine warmth. "Young lady, you're a hero," he said. "A genuine hero. The whole crew is talking about it." The plane began its pushback from the gate. 90 minutes late, but finally moving. The safety demonstration began again, and this time Tracy watched from a leather seat that reclined at the touch of a button, with more legroom than she'd ever experienced in her life. Takeoff was smooth. The plane climbed into the sky, and Atlanta disappeared below them once again. But this time, instead of being crammed in row 32, Tracy was watching the clouds from seat 2C, with a blanket that was actually warm and a pillow that was actually soft. Jerome brought them the first-class meal service, and Tracy's eyes widened at what appeared on her tray table. Real silverware, not plastic. A cloth napkin. A salad with actual vegetables that looked fresh. A main course that was honest-to-God Real chicken with pasta and cream sauce, not the dried-out mystery meat of economy. A dessert that was genuine chocolate mousse in a glass cup. And water, served in a sealed bottle that Jerome opened right in front of them, his wink letting them know he understood the irony. "Enjoy your meal, ladies," Jerome said. "And Tracy, anything you want for the rest of this flight, you just let me know. Anything at all." Constance and Tracy began talking again, and it was like watching two scientists who'd found each other across a crowded room. They discussed chemical reactions and the periodic table. They talked about famous experiments and scientific discoveries. Constance shared stories about chemistry applications in industrial manufacturing, and Tracy listened with rapt attention, asking questions that showed she understood far more than most 9-year-olds would. Denise sat quietly, eating her meal and watching her daughter come alive in a way she hadn't seen since before her father died. Tracy's eyes were bright, her hands gesturing as she explained something about molecular bonds. She was smiling, really smiling, that full-faced joy that had been missing for so long. At one point, Constance excused herself, saying she needed to make a phone call. She walked toward the galley area, pulling out an expensive-looking smartphone. Tracy didn't notice, too absorbed in the chocolate mousse that was possibly the best thing she'd ever tasted. But Denise noticed. She watched Constance's back, saw the way the older woman spoke quietly into her phone, her free hand gesturing occasionally with emphasis. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes, and when Constance returned to her seat, there was a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Everything all right?" Denise asked politely. "Everything's perfect," Constance replied, and something in her tone suggested she meant more than just the phone call. The flight continued. Outside the window, the country passed beneath them in patches of green and brown and the occasional glint of rivers catching sunlight. Inside the cabin, 3 lives that had started this journey as strangers were beginning to intertwine in ways none of them fully understood yet. Tracy fell asleep eventually, her head against the window, her father's journal open in her lap to a page about chemical safety protocols. Denise dozed off too, exhausted from emotion and the constant weight of 2 jobs and grief. Constance sat awake, watching them both. Then she pulled out a leather notebook from her own carry-on and began making notes, the same sharp, decisive handwriting Tracy had seen earlier on the Wall Street Journal. She was making plans. Important plans. Plans that would change everything. But that part of the story was still waiting in the future, somewhere over the mountains they were flying across, somewhere in the hours and days to come. Before we find out what Constance was planning in that quiet phone call, I need you to subscribe to this channel right now. Because what happens when they land in Seattle is going to absolutely blow your mind. This isn't just a story about a child saving someone's life. It's about what happens when courage meets opportunity, and trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. Here's my question for you. Have you ever had someone see your potential when you couldn't see it yourself? Someone who believed in you before you believed in yourself? Tell me about it in the comments, because that's exactly what's about to happen to Tracy, and it's going to change her entire life. The plane touched down in Seattle 3 hours and 42 minutes after takeoff, exactly 90 minutes later than scheduled. The wheels kissed the runway with barely a bump, and the engines reversed with that distinctive roar that always made Tracy's stomach do a little flip. Outside the window, the Pacific Northwest greeted them with typical gray skies and a light mist that made everything look soft and slightly dreamlike. As the plane taxied to the gate, passengers began the usual chaos of standing up too early, grabbing bags from overhead bins, checking phones that had been off for hours. But in first class, things moved more slowly, more deliberately. People weren't rushing. They had space to breathe, to gather their things without elbowing each other in the face. Constance Pemberton collected her belongings with the same elegant efficiency she seemed to bring to everything. Her Wall Street Journal, now slightly water-stained and wrinkled from the earlier incident, went into her Hermes handbag. Her reading glasses folded into their case with a soft click. She stood and smoothed down her cream suit, which had mostly dried during the flight but still bore faint watermarks that her dry cleaner would probably charge extra to remove. Tracy and Denise gathered their modest carry-on bags, both of them still a little dazed by the surreal experience of flying first class, of eating real food on real plates, of being treated like their comfort actually mattered. As they prepared to deplane, Constance reached into her handbag and pulled out a small leather card holder. She extracted a business card and handed it to Tracy with both hands, the gesture somehow formal and intimate at the same time. The card was heavy, expensive cardstock with raised lettering that Tracy could feel under her fingertips. It read, Constance Pemberton, CEO, Pemberton Global Industries. Below that was a phone number, an email address, and a physical address in Boston. Tracy's eyes went wide. She'd heard of Pemberton Global Industries. Even a 9-year-old who read everything she could get her hands on knew that name. They manufactured industrial equipment, aerospace components, medical devices. They had contracts with NASA. They employed thousands of people across 3 continents. And the woman whose life she'd saved was the CEO of the entire operation. You're. Tracy's voice came out as barely a whisper. Yes, Constance said with a slight smile. But that's not important right now. What's important is that I'd like to stay in touch with you, Tracy. You have a remarkable mind. The questions you asked during our flight, the way you think about problems, your natural curiosity, these are gifts. Rare gifts. She pulled out her phone, an expensive model that probably cost more than Denise made in 2 months. May I have your contact information? Your email, perhaps, or your mother's phone number? Denise fumbled for her own phone, a 3-year-old model with a cracked screen that she kept meaning to replace but could never quite afford. She recited their information while Constance entered it into her contacts with quick, precise taps. I'll be in touch, Constance said, and the way she said it made it sound less like a polite pleasantry and more like a promise. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything. And I mean anything. They exchanged warm goodbyes in the jet bridge. Constance's handshake was firm and dry, her grip conveying strength that belied her 74 years. Jerome appeared to help with Constance's luggage, and as Tracy and Denise headed toward baggage claim, Tracy looked back once to see Constance watching them go, that slight smile still on her face. That was surreal, Denise murmured as they rode the escalator down to the lower level. Absolutely surreal. Do you think she'll actually call? Tracy asked, clutching the business card like it might disappear if she didn't hold it tight enough. I don't know, baby. Rich people say a lot of things they don't mean. They're polite. It's how they operate. Denise's voice carried the weight of experience, of a lifetime of being on the receiving end of empty promises from people with money. But even if she doesn't, you did an amazing thing today. You should be proud. Tracy tucked the card carefully into her father's journal for safekeeping. She was proud. But she was also exhausted, emotionally wrung out, and suddenly very aware that they were in Seattle for a funeral, not a celebration. The reason they were here at all came crashing back down on her like a weight. Her aunt was dead. Her mother's only sister. Gone at 41 from a heart attack that came out of nowhere. And now they had to face a room full of grieving relatives and a casket and everything that came with saying goodbye to someone who left too soon. The funeral was held 2 days later in a small church in the Beacon Hill neighborhood. The service was traditional, with hymns that made Tracy cry even though she didn't know all the words, and a eulogy that painted Tracy's aunt as a woman who loved fiercely and laughed loudly and never quite got all the breaks she deserved in life. Tracy sat in the front row between her mother and her grandmother, wearing the only black dress she owned, one that was getting too small but would have to last another year. She watched her mother cry silent tears that ran down her face and dripped onto her hands folded in her lap. She watched her grandmother, somehow small and frail in a way Tracy had never seen before, stare at the casket like she could will her daughter back to life through sheer force of grief. The week in Seattle passed in a blur of casseroles brought by neighbors, relatives telling stories, sorting through belongings that her aunt had left behind. Tracy stayed quiet most of the time, processing her own layers of grief and trauma. The plane incident felt like it had happened to someone else, some other girl in some other life. But the media didn't forget. The story had broken online while they were still in the air, posted by passengers who'd recorded the whole thing and uploaded it the moment they landed. Within 24 hours, it had gone viral. 9-year-old saves billionaire from poisoning on flight. Read the headlines. The videos had millions of views. News outlets were calling it a miracle, a close call, a wake-up call about airline safety. Denise's phone rang constantly with calls from local news stations, national morning shows, podcast hosts who wanted interviews. Everyone wanted to talk to the brave little girl who'd saved Constance Pemberton's life. They wanted photos, video calls, exclusive stories. Denise turned them all down. "We're grieving," she told them firmly. "My daughter is not available for interviews. Please respect our privacy." She turned off the phone eventually, unable to handle the constant intrusion. They just wanted to mourn in peace, to get through this awful week, to go home and try to rebuild some sense of normalcy. News trickled in through relatives who were less good at staying offline. Brittany Sheffield had been fired immediately. The airline was conducting a full investigation. There were rumors of criminal charges, reckless endangerment, criminal negligence. The FAA was involved now. Congressional representatives were making statements about airline safety protocols. But in the small rental house where Tracy and Denise stayed with her grandmother, none of that seemed to matter much. They were too busy sorting through photo albums and crying over memories and trying to figure out how to move forward when someone you loved had been suddenly erased from the world. 1 week after the funeral, they flew back to Atlanta. Economy class this time, no drama, no excitement. Just a quiet flight where Tracy slept most of the way, emotionally exhausted and ready to be home. Their apartment in Atlanta was small, a 2-bedroom in a complex that had seen better days. The carpet was worn thin in the high-traffic areas. The kitchen appliances were older than Tracy. The air conditioning worked intermittently at best. But it was home, and after a week of sleeping in her aunt's guest room surrounded by grief, Tracy had never been happier to see her own bed. Life tried to return to normal. Denise went back to her 2 jobs, the medical transcription from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., the night custodian shift from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. Tracy went back to her summer reading and helping her grandmother with grocery shopping and trying not to think too much about everything that had happened. She kept Constance's business card in her father's journal, taking it out sometimes to look at the raised lettering, wondering if the promise to stay in touch had been real or just the polite thing rich people said. 10 days after they returned to Atlanta, their doorbell rang. It was a Saturday afternoon, hot and humid the way Atlanta got in summer, the kind of weather that made you sweat just standing still. Denise had just gotten home from her morning shift and was about to take a nap before her night shift. Tracy was reading on the couch, a library book about Marie Curie and radioactivity. The doorbell's chime made them both look up in surprise. They didn't get visitors. The few friends Denise had didn't drop by unannounced, and everyone else in their lives communicated by text or phone calls. Denise walked to the door, still in her work clothes, her hair pulled back in a practical bun. She looked through the peephole, and Tracy watched her mother's face go completely white. "Tracy," Denise's voice came out strangled. "Tracy, come here." Tracy set down her book and walked to the door. Denise opened it slowly, like she was afraid of what might be on the other side. Standing in the hallway of their worn apartment complex, looking completely out of place in an elegant navy pantsuit and pearl earrings, was Constance Pemberton. Beside her stood a man in an expensive gray suit carrying a leather briefcase, clearly a lawyer from the way he held himself with that particular professional gravity. "Hello, Denise." "Hello, Tracy." Constance's smile was warm and genuine, but there was something else in her eyes. Purpose. Determination. The look of someone who'd come to do something important. Denise couldn't find words. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Tracy managed a small hi, but it came out as barely more than a squeak. "I apologize for dropping by unannounced," Constance continued. "But I was in Atlanta on business, and I wanted to speak with you both in person. May I come in? This is Robert Chen, my attorney. I promise we're not here to cause any trouble. Quite the opposite, actually." Denise finally found her voice, though it came out shaky. Of course. Please, come in. I'm sorry about the mess, we weren't expecting." "Don't apologize," Constance said firmly as she stepped into their small apartment. "Your home is lovely." It was a kind lie. The apartment was clean because Denise worked herself to exhaustion to keep it that way, but lovely was a stretch. The furniture was secondhand. The walls needed painting. The TV was an old flat screen that had been a gift from Denise's mother 5 years ago. Everything in this space screamed making do with not enough. But Constance looked around with the same respectful attention she might have given a palace. She accepted the seat Denise offered on their worn couch, and Robert Chen sat beside her, placing his briefcase carefully on the coffee table that Tracy and her mother had found at a yard sale. Tracy and Denise sat in the 2 mismatched chairs across from them, both perched on the edge of their seats like birds ready to fly at the first sign of danger. "First," Constance began, folding her hands in her lap. I want to thank you again for what happened on that flight. I know it's been a difficult couple of weeks for you both. My condolences on the loss of your sister, Denise. Thank you, Denise whispered. I'm sure you've seen some of the news coverage. The airline is being investigated. There have been significant policy changes already implemented regarding galley safety protocols. And Brittany Sheffield has been charged with reckless endangerment. Her trial is scheduled for next month. Tracy felt a twist in her stomach at the mention of Brittany's name. She still had nightmares sometimes about that moment, about slapping the glass away, about what might have happened if she'd been wrong or too late. But that's not why I'm here, Constance continued. Robert, would you? The lawyer leaned forward slightly, his expression professional but not unkind. Ms. Washington, Tracy, I'm here in my capacity as legal counsel for Ms. Pemberton. What we're about to discuss is a private matter between you and my client. Anything said in this room remains confidential unless you choose to share it. He opened his briefcase with 2 precise clicks and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with what looked like documents. He placed it on the coffee table and slid it toward Denise. Constance's voice was steady and clear. Inside that envelope is a check for $50,000. It's a reward for saving my life. And before you refuse or tell me it's too much, let me explain why this amount is actually quite modest compared to what your daughter's actions were worth. Denise's hands were shaking as she reached for the envelope. She opened it with trembling fingers and pulled out a check that had so many zeros Tracy had to count them twice to believe what she was seeing. $50,000. Made out to Denise Washington. Signed by Constance Pemberton in that same sharp, decisive handwriting Tracy recognized from the airplane. Tears started streaming down Denise's face before she even seemed to realize she was crying. I can't, this is too much. We can't accept. You can, and you will, Constance said, and her tone left no room for argument. That descaling solution contained concentrated phosphoric acid. If I had consumed it, I would have died. Perhaps not immediately, but the damage would have been fatal. At my age, with my medical history, there would have been no recovery. Your daughter saw something everyone else missed. She acted when it would have been easier to stay quiet. She risked humiliation, punishment, and social consequences to save the life of a complete stranger. If you're watching this and you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, do it right now, because what Constance is about to reveal is going to change everything you thought you knew about this story. This isn't just about a reward. This is about something so much bigger. Let me ask you this, if you could change one child's entire future, would you do it? If you saw potential that was being wasted because of circumstances beyond their control, would you step in? Drop your answer in the comments, because that's exactly what's about to happen here, and you need to hear how this unfolds. Denise was shaking her head, her tears falling onto the check in her hands, the ink blurring slightly where the drops landed. This is too much. Tracy did what any decent person would do. She saw someone in danger and she acted. We can't accept this. It's not right to take money for doing the right thing. Please. Constance held up one hand, and that quiet authority filled the small living room again. Let me finish. There's more. Denise went very still, the check clutched between her trembling fingers. Tracy sat frozen in her chair, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Robert Chen reached into his briefcase again and pulled out another envelope, this one cream-colored and thicker than the first. He placed it on the coffee table with careful deliberation. Before I explain what's in that envelope, Constance said, her blue eyes moving between Denise and Tracy, I need you to understand something. I didn't come here on impulse. I've spent the last week learning about you both. And before you feel violated by that, please know I did it out of respect, not intrusion. I wanted to understand the full picture of who saved my life and what circumstances shaped her into the remarkable child she is. Constance leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on a tone that was both gentle and absolutely firm. Denise, you're a single mother working 2 jobs. You're a medical transcriptionist from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon at Piedmont Medical Center. Then you go home, sleep for 3 hours, and work as a night custodian from 8 p.m. until 4 a.m. at the Garrison Office Complex. You're running on 5 hours of sleep a night, sometimes less. You've been doing this for 3 years, ever since your husband passed away from complications of pneumonia and sepsis. Denise's face had gone pale. She looked like she wanted to say something, to protest this invasion of her privacy, but Constance wasn't done. Your late husband, Marcus Washington, left behind medical bills totaling over $87,000. You're paying them down at $300 a month, which means you'll be in debt for another 20 years at your current income. You skip meals to make sure Tracy eats. You walk to work when you can to save on gas. You haven't bought yourself new clothes in 2 years. Your car is 15 years old and needs a new transmission that you can't afford to fix, so you're just hoping it holds out a little longer. Tears were streaming down Denise's face now, but they were different tears. These were the tears of someone who'd been invisible for so long that being truly seen, being truly understood, felt almost painful in its intensity. And Tracy, Constance turned to look at the 9-year-old girl who was trying very hard not to cry. You're reading at a college level. Your teachers have been recommending advanced programs for years, but the good programs cost money your mother doesn't have. You spend your summers at the public library because you've read every book in your school library twice. You're teaching yourself chemistry from your father's journal and library books. You're exceptional, Tracy. Not just smart. Exceptional. Constance picked up the second envelope and held it out to Denise, who took it with shaking hands. Open it, Constance said softly. Denise's fingers fumbled with the flap. She pulled out a thick packet of documents, official-looking papers with letterhead that read Westbrook Academy in elegant script across the top. Her eyes scanned the first page, and Tracy watched her mother's face go through a series of expressions too complex to name. Shock. Disbelief. Hope. Fear. More tears. This is a full scholarship to Westbrook Academy, Constance explained, her voice steady and clear. It's one of the best private schools in the country. The scholarship covers grades 4 through 12, completely. Tuition, books, supplies, uniforms, transportation, everything. Tracy would start in the fall, and she would receive an education that will prepare her for any university in the world. Tracy felt like the floor had dropped out from under her chair. Westbrook Academy. She knew that name. It was the school where senators sent their kids. Where tech billionaires sent their kids. Where families with old money and new money sent their children to be educated by the best teachers with the best resources in pristine buildings with science labs that probably cost more than her entire apartment complex. I can't. Denise's voice broke. We can't possibly, this is too much. The money alone would have been too much, but this is. Wait, Constance said, and Robert Chen was already reaching into that magical briefcase for a third envelope. There's one more thing. Denise looked like she might faint. Tracy wasn't sure she was breathing anymore. This envelope was business-sized, white and crisp. Constance took it from Robert and handed it directly to Denise. This is a paid internship offer for you, Denise, at Pemberton Global Industries Atlanta office. We have a medical device manufacturing facility in Duluth, about 40 minutes from here. The position is medical transcription supervisor. You would oversee a team of 6 transcriptionists, manage quality control, and handle client communications. Constance paused, letting that sink in before continuing. The salary is $97,000 a year. Triple your current combined income from both jobs. Full benefits, including comprehensive health insurance, dental, vision, and a retirement plan with company matching. 4 weeks paid vacation. Sick leave. Personal days. Normal business hours, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. The silence in the small apartment was so complete that Tracy could hear the neighbor's TV through the thin walls, some game show with Ken laughter that felt absurdly out of place in this moment. Denise made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, entirely overwhelmed. She buried her face in her hands, and her shoulders shook with the force of her crying. 3 years of crushing exhaustion, of choosing between groceries and gas, of medical bills and sleepless nights and the constant grinding fear of one more emergency that would tip them over the edge into complete disaster. All of it came pouring out in those tears. Tracy slid out of her chair and wrapped her arms around her mother, and they held each other while Constance and Robert Chen sat quietly, giving them the space to process what had just happened. When Denise finally looked up, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red, but there was something else there too. Something that looked like hope, fragile and new, like the first flower pushing through snow. Why? Denise's voice was rough from crying. Why are you doing this? The money, I understand. A reward. But this? This is changing our entire lives. You don't even know us. Constance leaned back on the worn couch, and for the first time since she'd arrived, her perfectly composed expression softened into something more vulnerable, more human. I built my empire from nothing, she said quietly. I was born in 1952 to a working-class family in Detroit. My father worked in an auto factory. My mother cleaned houses. I put myself through college working 3 jobs, and when I graduated with an engineering degree, do you know how many companies would hire a woman engineer? None. 0. I was told repeatedly that manufacturing was men's work. That I should be a secretary or a teacher or a nurse. She smiled, but it was a smile with steel in it. I started Pemberton Global Industries in my garage in 1979 with $8,000 I'd saved and a patent for an industrial valve design that everyone told me would never work. I was underestimated my entire life because I was a woman in a field dominated by men. I know exactly what it's like when people don't see your worth, when they judge you based on circumstances rather than capability. Constance looked directly at Tracy, and her voice became even more intense. Tracy, you didn't hesitate. You saw danger and you acted, even when it was terrifying. Even when every adult around you was telling you to sit down and be quiet. Even when you knew you might be wrong and humiliate yourself and your mother. That's not just intelligence. That's courage. That's character. And character is something that can't be taught. You either have it or you don't. Tracy felt her own tears starting to fall. She thought about that moment on the plane, how scared she'd been, how her legs had shaken as she walked up the aisle, how every fiber of her being had screamed at her to stay in her seat and be good and not make a scene. My dad used to say something. Tracy's voice came out small but steady. He said, if you can help, you have to help. Even if it costs you something. Constance's eyes glistened with something that might have been tears, though they didn't fall. He raised you right. And I'm going to make sure his legacy continues through you. Which brings me to one more thing. Robert Chen smiled slightly, reaching into that bottomless briefcase one more time. I've established a scholarship fund in your father's name, Constance said, accepting the final document from her attorney. The Marcus Washington Memorial Scholarship at Westbrook Academy. It will fund 10 students per year, children who show exceptional promise but lack the financial resources to access quality education. Full scholarships, just like yours, covering everything from 4th grade through 12th. Tracy couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Her father's name. On a scholarship. Helping other kids like her. Kids who were smart and curious and trapped by circumstances they couldn't control. He would have loved that, Tracy whispered. He always said that education was the one thing nobody could take away from you. He was right, Constance said. And now his name will help ensure that 10 more children every year get that gift. In perpetuity. Forever. Denise was crying again, but these tears were different. These were tears of gratitude so profound that words couldn't contain them. She stood up, and Constance stood too, and Denise pulled this elegant billionaire into a hug that was fierce and desperate and full of 3 years' worth of hoping for a miracle she'd stopped believing would ever come. Thank you, Denise whispered into Constance's shoulder. Thank you. You've given us our lives back. You've given Tracy a future. Thank you. When they finally pulled apart, Constance was the one who looked slightly emotional, her perfect composure cracked just enough to show the human being underneath. Thank you, Tracy, Constance said, looking at the 9-year-old girl with the worn purple jacket and the brilliant mind. You gave me my life back too. And I intend to spend the rest of it making sure other children with your courage and intelligence get the chances they deserve. Robert Chen left several more documents, employment contracts, scholarship agreements, bank account information for the $50,000 deposit. He gave Denise his card and told her to call with any questions. He and Constance said their goodbyes with promises to see them soon, at Westbrook's orientation, at Denise's first day of work, at the scholarship fund's inaugural ceremony. And then they were gone, leaving Denise and Tracy alone in their small apartment with 3 envelopes that would change everything. 6 months passed. 6 months that transformed from impossible to actual, from dream to waking reality. It was a crisp autumn morning when Tracy stood in front of the mirror in her new bedroom, a real bedroom, not shared, with a desk and a bookshelf and a window that looked out over trees instead of a parking lot, and adjusted her Westbrook Academy uniform. Navy blazer with the school crest embroidered in gold thread. White button-down shirt. Plaid skirt. She looked like someone from a movie, someone whose life was supposed to be different from hers. But this was her life now. Denise appeared in the doorway, dressed in professional attire that actually fit properly, a burgundy blouse and black slacks that she'd bought with her first paycheck from Pemberton Global Industries. She wasn't exhausted anymore. She slept 7 hours a night. She ate 3 meals a day. She'd gained back the weight she'd lost from skipping meals and stress. Ready for your first day? Denise asked, smiling. I think so, Tracy said, though her stomach was doing nervous flips. They had one stop to make before school. Greenwood Cemetery was quiet in the early morning, the gravestones casting long shadows in the slanted sunlight. Tracy and Denise walked the familiar path to where Marcus Washington was buried, a simple headstone that read beloved husband and father, 1985 to 2023. Tracy knelt down and placed a bouquet of flowers against the stone. Yellow roses, her father's favorite. She pressed her hand against the cool granite and closed her eyes. "I think Dad would be proud," she said softly. Denise knelt beside her daughter, her hand joining Tracy's on the headstone. "I know he would be. He always said you were going to do something important someday. He just knew." They sat there for a few minutes in comfortable silence, the morning birds singing in the trees overhead, the world slowly waking up around them. Then it was time to go. Time for Tracy to start her first day at Westbrook Academy, at a school that would challenge her and push her and give her every opportunity to become whatever she wanted to be. The chemistry classroom was nothing like Tracy had ever experienced. Real lab equipment, not the broken beakers and outdated microscopes of her old school. Periodic tables on the walls that were laminated and color-coded. A teacher, Dr. Phillips, who had a PhD from MIT and actually got excited when students asked complex questions. Tracy sat at a lab table with 3 other students, all of them from families who'd paid full tuition, all of them a little uncertain about the new scholarship kid who'd shown up with her worn science journal and intense eyes. Dr. Phillips was explaining molecular bonds, drawing diagrams on the smart board, when she asked a question that made half the class go silent. "Can anyone explain why phosphoric acid is particularly dangerous when consumed, especially for individuals with compromised esophageal tissue?" Tracy's hand shot up before she could second-guess herself. She thought about that moment on the plane, about the bottle with the warning label, about Constance Pemberton's glass raised to her lips. Dr. Phillips looked surprised but pleased. "Yes, Tracy?" Tracy stood up, the way her father had taught her to do when presenting information, showing respect for the knowledge being shared. Her voice was steady and confident as she explained about acid pH levels, about tissue damage, about the specific dangers of industrial phosphoric acid versus the food-grade version used in sodas. The other students stared at her with something between surprise and respect. Dr. Phillips beamed. "Excellent answer, Tracy. Excellent. Where did you learn that level of detail?" "My father taught me," Tracy said, and she held up the worn leather journal she'd carried with her. "He was a lab technician. He believed that understanding how things work, especially dangerous things, was essential to staying safe." As the class continued, Tracy felt something settle in her chest. A sense of belonging. A sense that she was finally in a place where her mind could stretch and grow and reach for things she'd only dreamed about before. During lunch, she sat with 2 girls from her chemistry class who wanted to hear more about the plane incident, not in a gossipy way, but in genuine fascination. They asked thoughtful questions. They listened to her answers. They invited her to join their study group. By the end of the day, Tracy had made 3 new friends, impressed 2 teachers, and been invited to try out for the Science Olympiad team. When Denise picked her up, in a reliable car, with working air conditioning, that she'd bought with her new salary, Tracy climbed into the passenger seat with a smile so big it made her cheeks hurt. "How was it?" Denise asked. "It was amazing," Tracy said. "Mom, we learned about molecular structures today, and I got to actually use a real spectrometer, and Dr. Phillips said I might be able to do an independent study project next semester if I want, Anne." She talked the entire drive home, words tumbling over each other in excitement, and Denise listened with her heart so full it felt like it might burst. That evening, Tracy sat at her new desk in her new room, her father's journal open beside her laptop, a laptop that Westbrook had provided for all students, included in her scholarship. She was working on homework that actually challenged her, problems that made her think and stretch and occasionally get stuck in the best possible way. On her wall, she'd hung Constance Pemberton's business card, framed. A reminder of the moment when everything changed. When courage met opportunity. When doing the right thing, even when it was terrifying, opened doors she hadn't even known existed. Her voiceover narrates over these final images, Tracy studying at her desk, laughing with new friends in the Westbrook cafeteria, raising her hand in advanced chemistry class, standing with Denise at her father's grave with fresh flowers. "I learned that day on the airplane that doing the right thing isn't always easy. Sometimes it's terrifying. Sometimes every part of you wants to stay quiet, to stay safe, to not make waves. But my father taught me that fear is not a reason to stay silent. He taught me to read the labels. To pay attention to details. To speak up when I saw danger, even when it cost me something." The final image shows Tracy in her Westbrook uniform, standing in the chemistry lab with her father's journal in one hand and a beaker in the other, surrounded by friends, smiling with pure joy and confidence. That one moment of courage changed everything. Not just for me. Not just for my mother. But for 10 other students every year who will get the same chance I got. All because I decided that someone else's safety was worth more than my comfort. And I would make that same choice again. Every single time. The screen fades to black, and text appears. Tracy Washington graduated from Westbrook Academy with honors and is currently studying biochemical engineering at MIT. She interns every summer at Pemberton Global Industries. Denise Washington continues to work as medical transcription supervisor at Pemberton Global Industries and has been promoted twice. Constance Pemberton remains CEO of Pemberton Global Industries. The Marcus Washington Memorial Scholarship has helped 60 students since its inception. Brittany Sheffield pleaded guilty to criminal negligence and was sentenced to 200 hours of community service and 2 years probation. She is no longer employed in the airline industry. The airline implemented new safety protocols for galley management and chemical storage. No similar incidents have occurred since. Before this video ends, I need you to do something. Subscribe to this channel right now. Because there are more stories like Tracy's out there, stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, about courage showing up in unexpected places, about how one decision can change the trajectory of an entire life. Here's my final question for you, and I really want you to think about this. What moment in your life required you to choose between comfort and courage? What did you do, and how did it change you? Share your story in the comments. Because Tracy's story isn't just hers. It's a reminder to all of us that we have more power than we think we do. That paying attention matters. That speaking up matters. That doing the right thing, even when it's terrifying, always matters. Thank you for watching Tracy's story. May it inspire you to be brave when it counts.